Rob Reiner and Nick got into a, quote, very loud argument. His behavior at Conan's house alarmed the guests because it was so bizarre. One of the guests recalled Rob Reiner telling his son his behavior was inappropriate.
From the time she was young, a quiet fear grew inside Roy Reiner, and that fear was tied to her older brother, Nick Reiner. It wasn't loud or obvious at first. It lived in small moments, in uneasy silences, and in situations that made her heart race without her fully understanding why. Every time Nick invited her to tag along on outdoor trips, ROI felt her body tense up, unsure of what mood he would be in or how things might suddenly shift. As the years passed, those uneasy moments turned heavier. During periods when Nick seemed emotionally unstable, his words and behavior became unpredictable, creating an atmosphere that made ROI feel constantly on edge. At times, she feared that his lack of control could spiral in ways no one could stop, and that fear stayed locked inside her chest because she didn't want to hurt her parents. ROI watched closely as Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner stood by their son without hesitation. They believed in him, hoped for his recovery, and poured their energy into helping him through his struggles. Seeing their unwavering love, ROI made a painful choice. She buried her fear and stayed quiet, convincing herself that staying silent was the only way to protect her family.
I heard that the son, Nick, went into his parents' house, stabbed both mom and dad, and that the daughter, I guess, that she found them, and that the mom was still alive, and apparently she called the ambulance and went in the ambulance with her mother. Michelle died in the ambulance, but had enough time to tell her daughter that it was Nick.
Everything shattered the night she discovered her parents unresponsive in their bedroom. Overwhelmed and terrified, ROI finally spoke up, telling authorities what she had been afraid to admit for years, that she believed Nick was responsible. In her panic, she repeated the same desperate fear again and again, convinced that she might be in danger herself. For decades, ROI never spoke publicly. She didn't seek attention, didn't share interviews, and didn't try to explain herself to the world. Instead, she withdrew inward, learning how to survive alongside a constant sense of dread that made even breathing feel heavy. After her parents were gone, something inside ROI finally broke open. For the first time, she shared everything she had kept hidden. Many assumed substance struggles were the biggest issue, but for ROI, the situation had been frightening long before that. According to her, the warning signs appeared years earlier. Long before Nick's name became linked to serious accusations, he already showed signs of emotional instability. His mood could shift without warning, as if something inside him could change in an instant, and everyone around him felt it. ROI tried to keep her distance from Nick whenever she could, but that was almost impossible. How do you avoid someone who dominates the atmosphere of the home, especially when that person is your own brother and your parents still believe everything can be fixed? Those walls never felt neutral. They carried tension that followed her everywhere. She clearly remembers afternoons from when she was just 8 years old. Nick would call her outside, his voice calm and friendly, like he was inviting her to play an ordinary game. But his eyes told a different story, sharp, distant, and unsettling in a way she couldn't explain. He would start talking about small animals around the house, speaking casually about watching how long they could endure. Those words hit hard. ROI was too young to push back, but old enough to sense danger. She froze in place, her heart pounding, searching for a way to escape without directly refusing. "I don't like it," she whispered softly. Nick laughed, treating her fear like a joke, as if her discomfort entertained him. What stayed with RO? I wasn't just what Nick did, it was what he said. He had a way of dropping sentences quietly, without raising his voice, yet they echoed louder than shouting ever could. "If I wanted to, I could take everything out of control," he said calmly. ROI didn't fully understand the meaning, but she felt the warning underneath it. From that point on, she learned to stay quiet. She hid her fear so her parents wouldn't see what she sensed growing inside their son. Silence became her shield. As they grew older, the fear didn't disappear. It evolved. Nick began pulling ROI closer using emotional pressure, mixing half-truths with manipulation. "You're the only one who understands me," he told her. "You're the only one on my side. You and I are the same." Those words made her feel chosen, but also trapped. His invitations became more persistent. "Just try it once. You'll feel more relaxed," he said, presenting it like a bond. But to ROI, it felt like an invisible snare tightening around her. She later explained that Nick's anger could surface instantly. A careless comment, a look, even silence could flip the mood without warning. His voice would lower, his eyes would harden, and ROI knew she had to step back immediately. "Don't make me angry," he once said, not loudly but clearly enough to send a message. Her sense of safety always felt fragile, like it could snap at any second. There were moments when Nick completely lost control. I recalled times when he shouted, waved his arms aggressively, and lashed out over small disagreements. Each incident reinforced the same lesson: stay quiet, stay alert, and survive the moment. Something as small as dropping an object or reacting too slowly could send ROI into panic. She would curl inward, instinctively protecting her small frame, her heart racing with pure fear. After moments like that, she learned how to move carefully around him, like walking across shattered glass, knowing one wrong step could set something off. As she got older, the warnings became clearer. Nick no longer spoke only in vague hints. His words started carrying direct meaning. "Do you think I wouldn't dare?" That single question echoed through countless sleepless nights. Not because she believed he would act, but because she could no longer be sure that he wouldn't. Even now, recalling it makes her pulse spike, the fear never fully leaving. Living under the same roof meant existing in constant alert mode. I avoided being alone with him, avoided confrontation, avoided saying anything that might trigger his anger. Every move she made was calculated. This wasn't weakness, it was survival. She learned how to exist in a home where family bonds were tangled with constant tension. She remembers watching Nick from a distance, silently studying him, trying to predict what might come next. Even a minor accident, a small bump, or a careless moment felt risky. His eyes were unpredictable, sometimes empty, sometimes sharp, always unsettling. ROI learned to read every gesture, every shift in tone, because one mistake could change everything. What hurt her the most was knowing she couldn't tell her parents everything. She saw how exhausted they already were after years of trying to help her brother. From a young age, Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner had always shielded Nick, partly out of hope and partly out of fear. ROI carried that weight quietly, unwilling to add more pain. From the outside, the Reiner family still looked picture perfect. A famous father, a devoted mother, a home that seemed stable and secure. But behind closed doors, ROI learned a hard truth far too early. Love does not always equal safety. Some fears can't be erased by success or comfort. And Nick Reiner became the silent fracture running through their family for years. ROI remained deeply connected to her parents, watching every attempt they made to hold things together, every surge of hope followed by disappointment. Rob and Michelle never pretended things were easy. They spoke honestly with friends about the struggles of raising their second child. They talked about rehabilitation attempts, about moments when they believed stability was finally within reach, only for setbacks to follow again. At one point, Rob quietly admitted to someone close, "We just want our son to be alive." That sentence said everything. That simple yet heartbreaking sentence captured the fragile line between love and fear. ROI watched her parents pour everything they had into helping Nick. They searched endlessly for doctors, specialists, and treatment centers. They spent huge amounts on rehabilitation programs and reshaped their entire lives, just to stay close to their son. Michelle once said in a private conversation, "All I need is for him to call, even if it's in the middle of the night." For her, that constant availability was the final lifeline. Staying reachable meant keeping Nick connected to the family, no matter how exhausting it became. Anyone who spent time in the Reiner home could feel it. The air always carried a quiet tension, like everyone was walking on thin ice. Whenever Nick showed signs of progress, the whole family felt a wave of relief. And when he slipped back, the exhaustion returned instantly, visible in Rob and Michelle's eyes. Even then, they rarely complained. They never turned away from him. Instead, they loved him in the most draining way imaginable. Rob once told his daughter, "I don't know what else to do except keep loving him." Michelle echoed that belief again and again, even when she looked completely worn down. "Our family doesn't abandon one another." Those words weren't just promises, they were heavy burdens. ROI remembers one afternoon vividly. She walked into the living room and saw Nick yelling, his face flushed, his emotions spiraling. His hands were clenched as he grabbed at their parents, throwing harsh accusations their way.
What I feel after all of this is it's not about punishing. If somebody is struggling and has difficulties, you don't punish them for that. And I think a lot of these programs feel like the kid is being punished. And I don't think that's a great way to go. You're a parent and you think, here's my kid running out into the streets, going to get hit by a truck. You want to keep them safe.
He blamed them for everything, as if every hardship in his life rested on their shoulders. ROI stood frozen, her heart pounding, terrified and on the verge of tears, but unable to cry. Every word he spoke made her shake, because she knew his emotions could escalate without warning. There was another moment she could never forget. Nick began smashing objects around the room, sending a lamp crashing into a corner, before turning toward her mother in pure rage. Michelle stood there trembling, tears filling her eyes, but she didn't fight back. She wrapped her arms around herself and endured it silently. Rob stood nearby, watching his son with deep sorrow carved into his face. He didn't yell. He didn't step in. Both parents seemed to be trying to shield ROI from the worst of it while silently absorbing the pain themselves. Those scenes stayed with ROI for years. She understood something painful. Her parents loved Nick without conditions. Even when his behavior crossed boundaries, even when his words cut deeply, they endured quietly, choosing to carry the suffering so their daughter wouldn't have to face the full weight of it. ROI learned to stay alert, to observe carefully, to retreat whenever Nick's anger surfaced. She always knew where the safest corner was. And because of all that, ROI carried a painful truth inside her. The years when Nick was drifting from place to place, distant from the home, were the only times she could breathe freely. When he wasn't present in the family space, the tension eased slightly. The fear never vanished, but it faded just enough for ROI to live without feeling constantly stretched tight, like a wire pulled to its breaking point. During those years, ROI no longer had to anticipate her brother's moods or flinch at every sudden sound. She could finally sit down for dinner with her parents without bracing herself for tension. Some evenings, she talked freely, laughed out loud, and relaxed. Things that had once felt rare and risky. "I got home late from work today," she would say casually, and the house stayed calm, quiet, normal. Rob and Michelle, though deeply worried about Nick drifting somewhere out there, couldn't ignore the change in their daughter. They noticed she slept better. She spoke more. She no longer startled at shadows that weren't really there. Michelle once looked at ROI and said softly, "At least you're okay, right?" RO. I simply nodded. She didn't dare say more. The relief she felt was tangled with guilt. Nick's absence wasn't happiness. It was rest, a pause she desperately needed after years of constant alert. For the first time in a long while, she didn't have to act as a mediator. She didn't have to be endlessly patient. She wasn't managing emotions that weren't hers to carry. She was just their daughter, sitting on the couch, listening to Rob tell old stories, hearing Michelle ask about ordinary, everyday things. One time, Nick called from far away, his voice echoing through the speakerphone. ROI noticed something shocking. She didn't shake. She didn't freeze. The fear that once gripped her body wasn't there. When the call ended, she exhaled and said quietly, "At least he's not here." The words hung in the room. No one corrected her. No one argued. There was only silence, heavy, understanding silence. She laughed more, spoke more naturally, and for the first time in years, her family actually felt like a family again. And it wasn't just ROI who felt this way. Those close to the Reiner family had long sensed how frightening Nick could be, especially during the years when his addiction was at its worst. Jake Reiner, Nick's older brother, later admitted in an interview that he often locked his bedroom door. "Whenever Nick came home while using substances, I was afraid to be alone with him," he said. That fear never really faded. There were nights when he smashed things, yelled, and scared everyone, Jake shared, his voice still carrying the weight of those memories. "I never knew when he would lose control." A longtime family friend later described a gathering where Nick suddenly arrived in a volatile state. He smashed a bottle against the wall and shouted, "You all hate me!" The moment froze the room. Everyone was shaken, including children, and security had to step in to escort him out. The fear wasn't subtle, it was immediate. Even a well-known late-night host who attended a holiday gathering in December 2025 later admitted the mood turned deeply unsettling. When Nick got into a loud argument with his parents, the concern was real. "I was genuinely worried for Rob and Michelle," he said later. Nick's presence that night unsettled everyone. "There was something off," he explained. "His eyes made people uncomfortable." Former staff members from treatment centers later echoed similar concerns. One anonymous worker recalled that Nick was extremely difficult to manage. He had intense outbursts, trashed rooms, and made threats, they said. "We had to call authorities more than once." Even wellness sessions meant to be calming weren't spared. A yoga instructor who worked with the family in the early 2000s recalled that sessions meant for peace were often disrupted. What should have been tranquil frequently turned tense. All of it painted the same picture. A family exhausted, strained, and trying to survive something far bigger than anyone outside could see. Nick Reiner would sometimes show up without warning and erupt into intense screaming episodes that dragged on for long stretches. There was no clear trigger, no obvious reason. The shift was instant. Alana recalled how everything in the room tightened with fear. What stayed with her most wasn't just the shouting, but how Nick's parents reacted. Rob and Michelle didn't turn away. They stood their ground, facing their son directly, serious, worn down, and visibly worried. According to Alana, this was never a family pretending nothing was wrong. This was a family that recognized the danger early and fought desperately to keep it from spiraling. People who spent time in the Reiner home often said they felt the need to stay alert. Nick could remain quiet for long periods, almost invisible, then suddenly erupt. One close source explained that whenever Nick entered a space, the mood shifted instantly. Voices softened, laughter stopped, eyes searched the room as if looking for an exit. That same source shared that Nick carried deep resentment toward his father. It wasn't a phase or teenage rebellion. It ran much deeper. Nick grew up under the towering presence of Rob Reiner, admired, successful, respected, and Nick never felt he could measure up. That comparison became a wound that never closed. Over time, that unresolved sense of failure twisted into something darker and unpredictable. The frustration didn't fade, it hardened. In early 2025, when Nick stopped drifting and moved into the guest house, everything changed for ROI. Almost immediately, the anxiety she once managed from a distance sharpened into something constant. She felt it every day. Even though Nick wasn't inside the main house, his physical closeness erased any feeling of safety. Just knowing he was there, behind the garden, behind a door, made her chest tighten. To ROI, this wasn't a reunion. It was a warning signal. The idea of him living nearby unsettled her deeply. On the same property, that felt unbearable. "I don't feel safe," ROI reportedly whispered. So softly it sounded like she was afraid the words themselves might cause something irreversible. That fear is why she chose to leave. Moving out wasn't rebellion. It wasn't defiance. It was survival. She needed distance, to breathe, to sleep, to stop living in non-stop alert mode. Jake was the only one who fully understood. He didn't argue. He didn't question her decision. He simply said one sentence that meant everything. "I know you need this." Together, ROI and Jake tried to warn their parents, carefully and indirectly. They didn't issue demands. They didn't force confrontations. Every word was measured and restrained. "Nick isn't okay," Jake said once. "At least not okay to be this close." "R.O." I spoke even more quietly, but her expression said everything. "I'm afraid." Rob and Michelle saw it differently. To them, keeping Nick close was the only way to love him properly. They believed proximity meant protection. If he stayed within reach, they could intervene, guide him, and prevent things from going too far. "We just want to protect him," Michelle reportedly explained. "If not his family, then who?" That difference in perspective created a silent fracture. No shouting, no dramatic blow-up, just a deep divide in how safety was understood. The parents were guided by hope, believing love, patience, and presence could heal. ROI was guided by instinct, shaped by years of fear that had never fully been spoken aloud. There were moments when ROI tried to explain herself more clearly, but the words always caught in her throat. She was terrified of hurting her parents, afraid they would think she was being cold or heartless, afraid of being seen as the daughter who pushed her own brother away. So she said only what she could manage, that she didn't feel okay, that she needed distance, that she couldn't live like this anymore. Everything else stayed locked inside her. Jake stood in the middle, quietly protecting his sister while avoiding a direct clash with their parents. He repeated the concerns when he could, but he also saw the truth. Rob and Michelle were holding tightly to what felt like their last hope. "If we keep him close enough," Rob once said, "we won't lose him." To ROI, that sentence sounded less like a plan and more like a prayer. Even so, despite everything, ROI never turned her back on Nick. According to people close to the family, she continued to help him whenever she could. She showed up when needed. She answered his calls. She stepped in when her parents were drained and overwhelmed. At one point, she even called Nick her best friend. That's what makes everything so painful. All of this happened before that final day, before the police arrived, before the quiet house in Brentwood became a place forever changed. December 14th began like any other ordinary day. Nothing felt different. Nothing warned her of what was coming. When ROI walked into her parents' living room, she was completely unprepared for the scene waiting for her. Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner were lying still, unresponsive, unable to call out to one another one last time. There was no dramatic scream, no collapse the way people might imagine. Instead, a numbness spread through ROI, cold, paralyzing, unreal, as if time itself had frozen. It was ROI who found them, not a neighbor, not a caregiver, not law enforcement. Their daughter, the one who loved them deeply and had lived for years with quiet unease, was the one who made the discovery. Before officers arrived, before any barriers were placed, before the world knew what had happened inside that home, ROI called the police. Those close to her later described her voice as calm in a way that broke their hearts. It trembled slightly, but it never cracked. She gave the address clearly. She described the situation carefully. She stated that her parents were gone. When the call ended, the house fell into a heavy silence, the kind she had feared for years, but never imagined would come in this form. When law enforcement arrived, ROI looked directly at the officers and said a sentence that would stay with her forever. "My brother Nick, I think you should look into him." It was the most painful thing she had ever said. In that moment, she placed her own brother under suspicion in the loss of their parents. "I don't want to say this," she was later heard whispering, "but I can't not say it." Those close to the family insist her words didn't come from shock or panic. This wasn't an impulsive reaction. It was the result of years of watching, years of fear, years of wondering what would happen if everything finally crossed the line. In that moment, every suppressed instinct aligned into one devastating realization. After she spoke those words, ROI collapsed emotionally. From that point forward, she didn't just lose her parents. She lost the family as she once knew it. Jake arrived soon after. He didn't ask her why. He didn't question her. He already understood. She had already said what needed to be said. Jake didn't ask for explanations. He didn't need them. He wrapped his arms around his sister and held her tightly. "You did the only thing you could," he told her. Still, no words were strong enough to soften the truth. R.O. I had crossed a line no one ever wants to face. Even after Nick Reiner was taken into custody, the fear inside ROI didn't disappear. It didn't ease up. It sharpened. It clung to her through every waking moment. In the days that followed, she still didn't feel safe. To her, a locked door didn't mean the end. It felt like a fragile pause between two nightmares. ROI confided in Jake about her deepest fear again and again. If Nick were ever released, she believed the first person he would come looking for would be her. "I reported him," ROI whispered during one emotional breakdown, according to those close to her. "If he ever gets out, I don't think I'll survive." This wasn't a passing panic. It was a fear built over years and violently awakened by tragedy. Sources say ROI is now struggling with severe post-traumatic stress. Discovering her parents inside her own home shattered the last sense of safety she had. The images don't leave her. Not at night, not during the day. She wakes in terror. She startles at the smallest sounds. Sometimes she breaks down crying without knowing why. Other times, she goes completely numb, unable to feel anything at all. Through all of it, Jake became her anchor. Those close to the family say, I stayed close to him constantly, as if looking away for even a moment would cause everything to collapse. "Don't go anywhere," she once told him. "If I'm alone, I can't control my thoughts." Jake didn't ask questions. He already understood. He had watched his sister carry this fear for most of her life. Now it simply had nowhere left to hide. What caused ROI the deepest pain wasn't only losing her parents. It was the feeling that she had crossed a point of no return. Telling the police that Nick should be considered, even though it came from truth and self-preservation, became a wound she couldn't stop replaying in her mind. "I know I did the right thing," ROI reportedly admitted, "but I can't stop thinking he'll never forgive me." That thought followed her everywhere. According to sources, ROI now lives in constant preparation for the worst. She has changed her routines. She avoids crowded places. She always scans exits in every room she enters. Safety has become a relative idea for her. The danger doesn't live in the present. It lives in the possibility that it could return at any time. Those close to her stress that ROI isn't paranoid. She's trapped in memories that never fully go quiet. Her trauma didn't come from one single moment. It was the result of years of endurance, layered fear, and silence, all shattered by the irreversible loss of her parents. Nick may be behind bars, but in ROI's mind, his presence still lingers like a long, cold shadow. And that is the deepest tragedy of all. Even as the outside world believes order is being restored, even as justice slowly moves forward, ROI is still navigating her own quiet escape, an escape from memory, from fear, and from the weight of a truth that changed everything forever. Some truths, no matter how necessary, come at a heavy cost. For ROI, what she knew, what she felt, and what she once buried in silence has now become central to how this tragedy is understood. When she finally acknowledged her fear of Nick, it wasn't a late accusation. It was a truth that was finally allowed to breathe. RO. I wasn't just a witness to a devastating outcome. She was someone who had lived with that unease for years, long before it had a name. She learned how to avoid, adapt, and restrain herself just to protect the people she loved. And now, for the first time, she no longer has to do that. But this release doesn't look like peace. It comes with sorrow, with emptiness, with a deep sense of disorientation, like the main pillar of her life was suddenly ripped away without warning. The safety she once tried to preserve is gone. What remains is grief, confusion, and the unbearable weight of knowing that silence shaped everything. So the question still hangs in the air. If fear had been spoken sooner, could this tragedy have been prevented? Or are some families destined to pay for silence with suffering? ROI's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes love asks too much. Sometimes protection turns into endurance. And sometimes surviving means carrying a burden no one should have to bear. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think about ROI's story? Do you see her as courageous or as someone trapped in a family dynamic that demanded too much? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, make sure to like the video. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into real family stories that leave the world in stunned silence. And share this video so others can join the conversation. We'll see you in the next one.